My colleague Jacob Soboroff is joined by Beto O'Rourke. No one has made a stronger, more blunt case about Donald Trump than your guest, Jacob.
And Nicole Wallace just said nobody has made a stronger or more blunt case about Donald Trump than you have, Congressman. Right now, the president is on the tarmac greeting members of the Texas delegation. He's on El Paso soil. What goes through your head hearing that?
Well, I think this is the answer to that. You have all these beautiful people from El Paso, but also from Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua, Mexico, our sister city, who are coming together in the wake of this horrific loss of life, this terrorism that was in part inspired by President Trump and his warnings of invasions and infestations, his demonization of this community, immigrants as rapists and criminals. There's a very real consequence to that. It doesn't just offend us, it hurts us and it kills us. And so this community is coming together, focusing on one another, on making sure that those families heal. Wish the president had not come, but we're going to stay focused on El Paso.
And as you said, the reality is, the fact of the matter is, he is here. Right now, he's shaking hands with his political allies. We talked about earlier today how you, your successor, Congresswoman Escobar, chose not to participate in that at all. You've seen a lot of big rallies. Looking out at this crowd today, when you looked out at this one, how was it different for you?
Oh, it's just beautiful. I mean, here we are under a beautiful sky, a broiling sun. It's probably 101 degrees. Folks have been out here for hours listening to Congresswoman Escobar, now listening to Reverend William Barber, listening to one another, listening to dreamers, and celebrating the best of who we are. This is one of the safest cities in America, not despite, but because it's a city of immigrants. And I think though we bore the brunt of this attack and this hatred and this racism, we also hold the answer for this country that is so divided right now. There's a way to come together, not despite our differences, but by embracing our differences. That's what's made El Paso so special.
You've been very clear that you believe the president, in large part, is to blame for what happened over the weekend here in El Paso. How worried are you that with Donald Trump still in the Oval Office, something like this will inevitably happen again?
It will happen again, because what happened in El Paso is not an isolated incident. After the president warned of caravans, you had somebody go into the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh, warning of caravans. You had the mosque in Victoria, Texas, burned to the ground on the day that Trump signed his executive order seeking to ban Muslim travel to the United States. So there are very real consequences to his words, to his tweets, to the racism that he fans. You saw this in May at a rally in Florida. He says, how are we going to stop these people, meaning these immigrants, from coming to this country? Someone yells out, shoot them. The crowd roars their approval.
He laughs.
He laughs. He says, that's okay with me. So he's not the source of racism in this country. This country's been racist as long as it's been a country, but he is certainly fanning the flames. He is certainly making violence like this more possible and more real until we change course.
You've been very clear that you believe the president is a racist. Is the president a white supremacist?
He is. He's also made that very clear. He's dehumanized or sought to dehumanize those who do not look like or pray like the majority here in this country. He said, I wish we had more immigrants from Nordic countries, because those from Haiti bring AIDS, those from Africa come from shithole nations. He's been very clear about who he prefers to be in this country and who he literally wants to keep out with walls and cages and militarization and torture and cruelty. And again, we in El Paso have borne the brunt of all of that, but we in El Paso are standing up to all of that right now. And I've never been more proud of this community than I am at this moment.
All right, former Congressman Beto O'Rourke, appreciate it. Nice to see you again today.
Appreciate it. Yep.
Nicole, he's right. It's a 101-degree day out here, but it is really extraordinary to see the strength of this crowd, the unity of this crowd, the way everybody is coming together out here, even though many of these folks, maybe all of these folks, don't want to see the President of the United States here today.
Jacob, stay with us. I want to underscore two things. I think this presidential race will never be the same. You know how one of the top candidates has described Donald J. Trump, an incumbent president, as a white supremacist, changing the contours of this race from this point forward.
I mean, I think it's an extraordinary thing to say, but Beto O'Rourke consistently has pointed to the underlying documentation, the receipts, if you will, about the way that the president talks about people of color in this country, and it's long preceded what happened here this weekend. I mean, ad nauseum, we've talked about it, but the minute he came down the escalator, Mexicans are rapists and criminals. Congresswomen of color in this country should go back to where they came from. We've seen infestations and invasions, and the separation of children along the border started right here in El Paso. The pilot program in 2017 happened not far from where we are in the El Paso Border Patrol sector. So if you look at everything in isolation, maybe that there's a case to be made, but Beto O'Rourke says we have to synthesize it. We have to look at it as a whole. And his conclusion is that Donald Trump, the president of the United States, is a white supremacist.
Jacob, I don't know if you have somewhere to go, but if you could hang out with us for a few more minutes. I want to come back to the interview, but I want to get some quick reaction from Jason Johnson. I believe the Democratic primary, there will be the day before Beto O'Rourke called Donald Trump a white supremacist, and the day after. I think the Democratic primary now changed, the face of it, the feel of it. We came on the air with the Biden speech seemingly changing this Democratic primary, a litany of Donald Trump's racist rhetoric laid out and tied to the violence in El Paso. You now have Beto O'Rourke, a son of El Paso, someone who has been blunt in calling Donald Trump a racist, in tying the rhetoric to the violent, now saying, yes, he is indeed a white supremacist.
That is an amazing moment. I completely agree with you, Nicole. And also this, not only does this give us the Beto moment, if we're going to talk pure politics, the Beto moment, but it also sets a new baseline for how these Democrats have to talk about this president. Because the extension of this, right, and we've seen this with Joaquin Castro, we've seen this with certain things that Joe Scarborough said is, since we have identified this president as being a white nationalist and a racist, that means if you support him, you bear some responsibility, which changes the complete dynamic of the 2020 race with many of these candidates like, well, we need to reach out to these. Well, do you? Do you now? Because if you are saying that you're trying to reach out to people who support white nationalism, racism, and domestic terrorism. So I think this is a new dividing line in the 2020 race. I think it's a welcome line. I think I'm glad that Democrats are going to walk across it and make a clear statement, because this is not just about good feelings in elections now. It's the soul of the nation, as Joe Biden said. It's about a racist president, and it's about us coming together and recognize what's really at stake.